It happened in the blink of an eye, the kind of moment that splits your life into before and after, shattering the suburban silence like a dropped glass on a tile floor. I was inside, pouring a second cup of coffee, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower, completely unaware that outside, under the blinding glare of the Arizona sun, my world was about to catch fire. My wife, Sarah, a woman who has spent the last decade teaching 5-year-olds how to share and tie their shoes, a woman whose gentleness is her defining feature, was on her knees in the dirt, tending to her hydrangeas. She was wearing her favorite oversized gardening hat, the one with the frayed brim, looking for peace in the soil, but what she found instead was a war declaration taped to our front gate. It was a neon orange citation, flapping in the hot wind, screaming about a code for violation regarding the height of our privacy hedge, threatening fines that escalated faster than a predatory loan. Sarah, being the daughter of a lawyer and the wife of a man who spent 20 years in the darkest corners of the world with Delta Force, didn't panic. She just pulled out her phone to document it. That's the rule in our house. You document first, you argue later, because truth is the only ammunition that matters in the civilian world. But as she filmed the citation, a shadow fell over her, 2 shadows actually, casting long, distorted shapes across the manicured grass of Whispering Pines Estate. They looked like bad extras from a straight-to-DVD action movie, wearing tactical vests that were 2 sizes too small and carrying an air of unearned authority that usually masks deep insecurity. The big one, a slab of meat named Brock, had sweat stains blooming under his armpits, while his partner, a wiry, twitchy guy named Slider, kept tapping a baton against his leg like he was praying for an excuse to use it. They weren't cops. They were private security contractors hired by the HOA, glorified mall ninjas with a god complex. When Brock barked at Sarah to stop recording, claiming some nonsense about enforcement privacy, she didn't flinch. She just held her ground and stated her rights with the calm voice she uses on unruly toddlers. That should have been it, a verbal spat, a ticket, a grievance filed later, but Slider's ego was fragile, made of cheap glass, and her defiance shattered it. I didn't see the wind-up, but I heard the impact through the open window, a sickening, wet crack that sounded like a baseball bat hitting a melon. I looked out just in time to see Sarah's head snap back, her phone tumbling into the Bermuda grass, her hand flying to her face as she stumbled, shock painting her features before the pain even registered. He had punched her, a full force, closed fist strike to the face of a kindergarten teacher in her own front yard over a hedge dispute. The rage that hit me wasn't hot. It wasn't the frantic, screaming anger you see in bar fights. It was cold, absolute, and clinical, the kind of ice-water clarity that settled over me in Kabul and Syria. I didn't run. I moved with purpose, the screen door not slamming but clicking shut behind me as I stepped onto the porch, barefoot, wearing nothing but worn jeans and a black t-shirt. The atmosphere in the cul-de-sac shifted instantly. The birds seemed to stop singing. The air grew heavy, and even the neighbors who were peeking through their blinds held their breath. "I'm former Delta," I said, my voice low, barely a whisper but carrying across the lawn like a shockwave. "You just assaulted my wife." Brock sneered, mistaking my calm for fear, and cracked a joke about stolen valor, while Slider tried to puff up his chest, but I could see the tremor in his hands, the lizard brain realization that they had just kicked a sleeping dragon. I gave them one chance, a single opportunity to get on their knees and wait for the real police. But Brock, fueled by adrenaline and stupidity, lowered his shoulder and charged me like a bull seeing red. It was almost tragic how easy it was. He came in with wide, telegraphing swings, expecting a brawl, but I gave him geometry. I pivoted, a subtle shift of weight that sent his momentum crashing past me, and as he stumbled, I introduced his face to the solid oak post of our porch railing. The sound of his nose shattering was loud enough to make the neighbor across the street, Mrs. Higgins, drop her watering can. Brock hit the ground wailing, blood pouring onto his tactical vest, turning the cheap fabric dark crimson. Slider, seeing his partner down, panicked and tried to swing that baton, a wild, desperate arc that had no technique behind it. I ducked under the swing, stepped into his personal space, and swept his leg, sending him crashing into the sprinkler system. I didn't keep hitting them. I didn't need to. They were broken men, groaning in the mud, their fake authority dissolving in puddles of tap water and blood. Sarah was already up, her cheeks swelling to the size of a plum, but she was still filming, her hands steady despite the trauma, whispering, "I've got it, Elias, I've got it all." The police arrived 10 minutes later, real officers with real badges, led by Officer Rains, a good man who looked at the carnage, looked at my wife's face, and then looked at the two weeping enforcers on my lawn with pure disgust. But the real turning point wasn't the arrest. It was what we found on Brock's phone, which had fallen out during the scuffle. A text message, glowing on the cracked screen, stamped just 3 minutes before the punch. "Boss wants a lesson taught. Use physical force if she resists. Timestamp it." The sender was listed simply as the Baroness. As the ambulance took the trash away, my neighbor from 2 doors down, Marcus Hale, walked over. Marcus is a retired homicide detective, a man who has seen the worst of humanity and decided to spend his retirement fishing and ignoring people. But today, his eyes were sharp. He looked at the text photo I'd taken, looked at Sarah, and said one name that dropped like a lead weight: Karen Sterling. Karen Sterling, the HOA president, the woman who ran Whispering Pines like a personal fiefdom, measuring grass with a ruler and fining people for the wrong shade of beige. Marcus told me this wasn't just about rules, it was a racket, a way to force people out or make them pay, but hiring thugs to assault a resident? That was an escalation that signaled something darker. That evening, the doorbell rang, and it was Mrs. Higgins, the elderly lady who usually just watches the street from behind her lace curtains. She was trembling, clutching a thick, leather-bound folder like it was a holy relic. She came into our kitchen, looked around nervously as if the walls had ears, and placed the folder on the table. "I was her secretary," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I thought it was just organization, keeping the neighborhood nice, but then she started making lists." We opened the folder, and my blood ran cold. It wasn't just HOA records, it was an intelligence dossier. Photos of residents, bank statements she shouldn't have access to, notes on marital problems, work schedules, weaknesses. And there, next to my name, under a column titled Obstacles, was a note in aggressive red ink. Phase 2. Provoke and eliminate. Use the husband's PTSD against him. She hadn't just sent goons to punch my wife. She had tried to bait me into a violent rage to get me arrested, to ruin us. This wasn't a neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a tactical operation, and Karen Sterling had just made the mistake of starting a war with a man who wrote the book on them. The days following the assault felt less like suburban living and more like the calm before a mortar strike. The air thick with paranoia and the silent, judging eyes of neighbors who were too afraid to pick a side. Karen Sterling wasn't just a busybody. She was a spider sitting in the center of a web that stretched across the entire Whispering Pines community, and she had leverage on everyone. We found that out the hard way when we walked into the county courthouse for the preliminary hearing against the 2 thugs, expecting a slam dunk, only to watch our neighbor, Dave Miller, take the stand. Dave was a guy I'd loaned tools to, a guy whose kids played with my nieces. But as he sat in that witness chair, sweating through his cheap suit, he wouldn't even look me in the eye. He told the judge, a stern woman named Judge Vance, that I was the aggressor, that I had threatened to kill the enforcers before they even stepped onto the property. It was a lie so bold it sucked the oxygen out of the room, and I saw Karen Sterling sitting in the back row, wearing a pristine white suit, smiling like a cat that just swallowed a canary. But Karen had forgotten the first rule of engagement. Always know your enemy's capabilities. Marcus Hale, my ex-detective neighbor, simply stood up and handed our lawyer a USB drive. Permission to treat the witness as hostile, our lawyer said, plugging the drive in. The video played on the courtroom monitors, not just Sarah's phone footage, but footage from Dave Miller's own security camera, which Marcus had legally subpoenaed days ago without Dave knowing. The video clearly showed Dave watching the assault from his garage, wincing as Sarah got punched, and then later, it showed Karen Sterling visiting his house, handing him a thick envelope. "Mr. Miller," Judge Vance said, peering over her glasses, her voice dropping to a terrifying register. "Would you like to amend your statement, or should I have the bailiff remand you into custody for perjury right now?" Dave crumbled. He wept openly, confessing that Karen had threatened to foreclose on his house over unpaid dues if he didn't lie. The courtroom erupted. Karen's smile vanished, but as she stormed out, She stopped by our table and leaned in, her perfume smelling like lilacs and rot. "You think this is over, Elias?" she hissed, her eyes manic. "Phase 3 targets what you love most. Meadowbrook Elementary is a very open campus." My heart stopped. She was threatening the school. She was threatening Sarah's students. We didn't go home. We went to Joe's Diner on the edge of town to meet a ghost. Marcus had dug deep and found Arthur Sterling, Karen's ex-husband, a man who had supposedly died or moved to Alaska, depending on which rumor you believed. He was alive, living out of a motel, looking like a man haunted by demons. When we told him about the school threat, he didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "She calls it scorched earth," Arthur said, staring into his black coffee. "She did it to me. She destroys the reputation, then the finances, then the safety. She has a god complex, Elias. She believes she is the necessary evil that keeps chaos at bay." He slid a heavy box across the table. I kept the receipts. The offshore accounts where she funnels the HOA fines, the bribes to city council members, the payments to the security firm. It's all here. I was too scared to use it, but if she's going after kids, I'm in. Armed with Arthur's evidence and Mrs. Higgins's dossier, we didn't wait for the next court date. We went on the offensive. We called an emergency community meeting at the rec center, bypassing the board entirely. The room was packed, tension radiating off the walls. When Karen walked in, flanked by her lawyers, demanding we disperse, I didn't yell. I just turned on the projector. We showed them everything. The breakdown of the stolen funds, the photos of the hit list, the video of the punch, and finally, a recording Arthur had kept of a drunk voicemail, where Karen laughed about breaking the will of the peasants. The room turned. It was a beautiful thing to witness, the collective realization of 50 families that they had been bullied by a criminal in a pantsuit. They voted to remove her immediately, a unanimous show of hands that looked like a wave of liberation. Karen screamed, actually screamed, calling us ingrates and traitors, but as security escorted her out, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. The text was simple, chilling, and confirmed my worst fears. Phase 3 initiated. 12 p.m. The playground. It was 11:45 a.m. We raced to the school, Marcus calling in every favor he had with the local SWAT team, me driving like a madman, blowing through red lights, my mind flashing with images of Sarah and her class of innocent 5-year-olds. We weren't fighting a neighbor anymore. We were fighting a domestic terrorist who had lost her kingdom and decided to burn the village down on her way out. We screeched into the parking lot of Meadowbrook Elementary just as the midday bell rang, the sound piercing the humid air like a siren. Police cruisers were already swarming the perimeter, Marcus having triggered a silent alarm code that bypassed the usual dispatch delays. I hit the pavement running, ignoring the shouts of the uniformed officers, my eyes scanning the playground fence line, looking for threats, looking for anything out of place. I found Sarah corralling her students behind the jagged brick wall of the cafeteria, her face pale, but her movements precise. She was shielding them with her own body. But there was no gunman, no bomb squad. Instead, stood a solitary figure by the swing set. Karen Sterling, holding a megaphone in one hand and a lighter in the other, standing next to a pile of what looked like documents soaked in gasoline. She wasn't there to hurt the children physically, not directly. She was there to traumatize them, to burn the school's records, to create a spectacle of chaos that would scar the community forever. "You took my crown," she shrieked, the lighter flickering. "Now watch your sanctuary burn." Before she could drop the flame, a tackle hit her from the blind side. It wasn't me. It was Arthur Sterling, her ex-husband, the man she had broken years ago, slammed into her with the force of a freight train, knocking the lighter into a puddle and pinning her to the mulch. "It's over, Karen," he sobbed, holding her down as the police swarmed in. "It's finally over." The trial that followed was the media event of the year for our county. The HOA terrorist, they called her. The courtroom was packed, the air electric with the promise of justice. Arthur took the stand, his voice steady for the first time in years, detailing the decades of abuse and fraud. Mrs. Higgins testified about the dossier. Sarah testified about the assault. But the nail in the coffin, the piece of evidence that ensured she wouldn't just get probation or a fine, was that text message, the Phase 3 threat sent to my phone. The defense tried to argue she was mentally unstable, unfit for trial, but that text proved premeditation, It proved malice. It proved she was lucid enough to plan a coordinated attack. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, including domestic terrorism, racketeering, and assault, Karen didn't scream. She just stared at me, her eyes dead and cold, as the bailiff clicked the handcuffs shut. She was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The courtroom erupted in cheers, people hugging, Dave Miller shaking my hand and apologizing profusely, Arthur weeping quietly in the back row. That weekend, Whispering Pines threw the biggest block party in its history. The smell of barbecue smoke replaced the stench of fear. Kids ran through the sprinklers, music blared, and for the first time, neighbors spoke to each other without looking over their shoulders. Sarah and I sat on our porch swing, watching the sunset, her hand in mine. The bruise on her cheek finally faded to a memory. Marcus Hale walked up, holding 2 cold beers, and sat on the steps. He looked at the party, then at me, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. "You know," Marcus said quietly, taking a sip, "technology is a funny thing. Sometimes texts get lost. Sometimes they get found. And sometimes they get sent from a clone SIM card just to make sure the bad guy doesn't walk on a technicality." I froze, the bottle halfway to my lips. I looked at him, really looked at him. The Phase 3 text. The timing. The specific wording that perfectly incriminated her. She was going to the school anyway. Elias, Marcus whispered, staring straight ahead. She had the gas. She had the intent. But without that specific threat on record, a good lawyer could have pleaded it down to reckless endangerment. She would have been out in 2 years, right back on your doorstep. I just ensured the punishment fit the crime. He stood up, patted my shoulder, and walked back into the crowd of laughing neighbors. I sat there, the cold condensation of the beer bottle dripping onto my hand. I looked at Sarah, laughing with Mrs. Higgins. I looked at the peace we had fought for, bled for. Was it justice? Or was it just a different kind of corruption, the kind used by good men to stop monsters? The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street. A moving truck pulled into Karen Sterling's old driveway. The new owners were unloading boxes. I saw the husband pointing at the property line, discussing the installation of high-tech security cameras with a contractor. He looked paranoid, intense, territorial. I tightened my grip on Sarah's hand. The war was over, but looking at the new neighbors, I realized that in the suburbs, the peace is only ever a ceasefire. I took a sip of my beer, watching the cameras go up, and wondered if I should keep my boots by the door, just in case.